Welcome in, everybody, to another deep dive. And this time we're going to California in the 1970s.
Sunny California.
Yeah, it was an era of freedom and, carefree spirits for sure, but it also had a darker side.
A much darker side.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're talking about the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Murders.
And hitchhiking was so common back then. There was a sense of trust, almost a sense of naivete that looking back was pretty misplaced.
Yeah, and it's just heartbreaking to think about the lives that were cut short and the families that were left behind with just so many unanswered questions.
Absolutely. And this case has really haunted that community for decades.
Yeah, so to get a better handle on this case, we're diving into this Wikipedia article on the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Murders, and it's really fascinating because it pulls together police reports, news articles, even information from a recent documentary.
Multiple perspectives are so crucial in these kinds of cases. It's like assembling a giant puzzle. Every single piece, even the ones that seem insignificant, could bring us closer to the truth.
Exactly. All right, so let's jump in. The article starts by introducing us to the victims, and it's just devastating right from the start. We meet Maureen Sterling and Yvonne Weber, these two young girls, just 12 and 13 years old.
So young.
I know. And they vanish after an evening at the ice rink in 1972, and their bodies weren't found for 10 months.
10 months. Can you imagine the agony their families went through?
It's just unimaginable. And there's this one detail that really sent chills down my spine while reading this article.
So tell me.
A witness at the ice rink remembers seeing the girls talking to a man who looked like Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
That sends chills down my spine. He was known to be in California around that time, and while he was eventually ruled out as a suspect in these particular murders, it really makes you think about those what-ifs.
It does. What if
Yeah.
these young girls were some of his early victims, or what if they were just tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time,
It's a terrifying thought.
It is. And the article goes on to introduce us to more victims, and it's just heartbreaking reading their stories and knowing their lives were cut so short. One that really stood out was Kim Wendy Allen. She was a 19-year-old art student.
I remember reading about her. Didn't she frequently hitchhike despite warnings from her friends and family?
She did, and sadly, her body was found just a day after she disappeared.
And there were signs of a struggle, right? Like this wasn't just a quick silent abduction. She fought back.
Yeah, it sounds like she really fought for her life. And there's this other strange detail that was mentioned, an oily substance found on her body.
That could be a clue, right?
Yeah.
Could it be connected to the killer's job or maybe some weird habit he had?
It's like a breadcrumb, right? Leading us deeper into this whole mystery. And then there's Lori Lee Cursa. She was only 13 years old, a runaway already navigating such a tough life, and her frozen body was found weeks after she vanished.
And there was this chilling detail that suggests she may have tried to escape. Her neck was broken.
Oh.
Yeah, it really paints a picture of desperation, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if she jumped or was pushed from a moving vehicle. It just adds another layer to this already complicated case.
It does. Then we have Carolyn Nadine Davis, a 15-year-old runaway whose journey across the country ends tragically in Santa Rosa. Her case is especially disturbing because she was found poisoned with strychnine.
Strychnine poisoning. That's not your typical impulsive act. That suggests premeditation. A carefully planned murder.
Yeah.
Which raises a whole new set of questions about the killer's motive and his state of mind.
It's just chilling to think about, and it gets even more disturbing when we meet Teresa Diane Smith Walsh. She was a 23-year-old mother who was hitchhiking home for Christmas.
Hitchhiking home for Christmas. It doesn't get more heartbreaking than that.
It really doesn't. And can you imagine how her family felt, especially during the holidays when her body was later found hogtied and strangled?
Hogtied and strangled. That level of control over the victim, the way she was bound, it could be a crucial part of this puzzle. It might connect her case to others, the sort of signature that the killer repeated.
Right. And when you look at all the victims we've talked about so far, you start to see this pattern emerging.
What do you mean?
Well, it seems like the killer wasn't focused on a specific type of woman, It was their vulnerability that made them targets. Their need to get from one place to another, their trust in others.
Their trust in others. That's a powerful point. It's that shared vulnerability that connects these cases, that binds them together in this dark tapestry.
Exactly. And it just shows that even in an era of supposed freedom, danger can lurk in the shadows.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've only just begun to unravel this mystery. We've got more victims to discuss, potential links to other cases, and a whole list of suspects that will have you on the edge of your seat.
Oh yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
So stay tuned as we continue to explore the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker Murders.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. So we're back, and we've just started to dig into the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, and it's already a wild ride.
It really is. And, when you're dealing with unsolved cases like this, ones that really capture the public's attention, there are some names that just always seem to come up.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what I mean. Like, it's almost a reflex.
Exactly. And one of those names that's practically synonymous with unsolved mysteries is the Zodiac Killer.
Right, and the Wikipedia article we're looking at doesn't shy away from that possibility at all. It mentions this unknown symbol found near Carolyn Davis's body
Right.
that looked kind of similar to the Zodiac's own symbols, and there are some possible overlaps in their MOs too. It definitely got me thinking, what are your thoughts on the whole Zodiac connection?
Well, you can see why people make the connection, right? The Zodiac was a master manipulator. He loved toying with the police and the media with all those cryptic messages and ciphers.
Oh yeah, those ciphers were
They were
insane.
incredibly complex, using all sorts of symbols and codes. Some of them have never even been cracked, which just adds to the mystery.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what makes it so easy to connect him to other unsolved crimes.
Right? People want to find a simple solution, a neat little box to put everything in. But the truth is, there's rarely any solid evidence linking the Zodiac to these other crimes.
So is it just wishful thinking then? Or could there actually be something more to it?
It's always worth considering, of course.
Yeah.
We can't just dismiss anything without looking into it.
Hmm.
But it's important to be skeptical, too. Approach these connections with a critical eye.
Right. The article then goes on to talk about another suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, who was a prime suspect in the Zodiac case for a while.
Oh, yeah, Arthur Lee Allen. He had a pretty disturbing past connections to Santa Rosa. He even owned a watch with the Zodiac symbol on it.
Yeah, but I thought he was eventually ruled out as the Zodiac.
Well, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
See, this is where things get really tricky with criminal investigations. Circumstantial evidence can be compelling, it can point investigators in the right direction, but it doesn't always guarantee a conviction.
Right.
In Allen's case, there was a lot of suspicion, a lot of things that seemed to fit, but never that one undeniable piece of evidence that definitively linked him to the crimes.
So even though DNA evidence later cleared him as the Zodiac Killer,
There are still people who believe he could be involved in the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders. He remains this shadowy figure, and the questions surrounding his possible involvement, they just linger.
so we've got the Zodiac as maybe a long shot. We've got Arthur Lee Allen still lurking in the shadows. And then there's another name that always seems to come up in these conversations, Ted Bundy.
Oh, yeah.
I know he was active in California during the time of some of the Santa Rosa murders, but I thought he was ruled out pretty definitively.
He was ruled out, but again, it's understandable why his name keeps popping up. Bundy was a charismatic and incredibly cunning predator who targeted young women. His crimes really shook the nation.
Oh, absolutely.
And when you're dealing with cases like the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, it's natural to try to fit known offenders into the narrative.
So if there's no direct evidence connecting Bundy to these crimes, how can investigators be so sure it wasn't him?
Well, that's where the science of criminal profiling and geographical mapping come in. Investigators meticulously analyze every detail of the crimes. The victim profiles the methods of killing, the locations, and then they compare all of that to the known patterns of convicted offenders.
I see.
And in Bundy's case, his confirmed victims and his known movements, they just don't align with the Santa Rosa cases.
That makes sense. Plus, there's some pretty big differences in the way the victims were killed.
Right. Bundy's crimes were often characterized by a really disturbing level of sexual sadism, whereas some of the Santa Rosa murders seem more opportunistic, maybe driven by rage or a need for control.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle. Sometimes a piece might look like it fits, but when you look closer, you realize the edges don't quite match up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of trying to fit pieces together, the article then brings up another suspect, Frederick Manali. And this is where things get really interesting.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about him. He was a creative writing instructor at the same college Kim Allen attended, right?
Yes, and his story adds this whole other layer of creepiness to the case. After Manali died in a car accident, investigators were searching his belongings, and they found a collection of his drawings.
Oh, no.
And what they found was truly disturbing. Manali had created a series of sadomasochistic drawings, and some of them actually depicted Kim Allen.
That's so creepy. It's like something out of a horror movie. But if he was already dead, how could they investigate him any further?
That's the frustrating thing about post-mortem investigations. You can uncover evidence, you can find these connections that make your heart race, but you can't interrogate the suspect. You can't observe their behavior, their reactions.
Right.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. So while those drawings are definitely creepy and suggestive, They don't actually prove that Minnelli was guilty.
So he remains this tantalizing but ultimately frustrating figure, another dead end in this whole maze of unanswered questions.
Exactly. Then you have Jack Boken, who was a convicted serial rapist who died in prison in 2021, and his story really shows the power of advancements in forensic science, especially DNA technology.
Right, DNA evidence has been huge in cracking cold cases.
It really has. Boken's case is a perfect example of how DNA evidence can breathe new life into these old cases, even decades after the crimes were committed. Years after his death, his DNA was linked to the 1996 murder of Michelle Veal.
Wow. So even though he was already dead, his DNA connected him to another crime. That must have been a major breakthrough for investigators.
It was. It just shows that even though a suspect might be deceased, their DNA can still link them to crimes, potentially bringing some justice to the victims and their families.
So does that mean Boken is now considered a suspect in the Santa Rosa cases?
It definitely puts him on the radar.
Yeah.
His criminal history, his violence against women, and the fact that he was active in California during the time of the Santa Rosa murders make him a person of interest for sure. Investigators are probably going through all the evidence with a fine-tooth comb, looking for any possible connection between Boken and the victims.
It makes you wonder how many other cold cases are just waiting to be solved thanks to these advancements in DNA technology.
It's like having this whole new set of tools to uncover the truth.
Absolutely. But wait, the article mentions one more possible suspect, and this one's really interesting, Jim Mordecai.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Jim Mordecai. He was featured in that 2024 HBO documentary, The Truth About Jim. And his story really proves that you can't judge a book by its cover.
Right. He was a high school teacher, a seemingly normal guy leading a normal life.
But the documentary explores this idea that maybe this ordinary man was hiding a dark secret, a monstrous side that he kept hidden from the world.
But if he had no criminal record, how did he even become a suspect in the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders?
It all started after his death when his family was going through his belongings. They found a box tucked away, and inside was a collection of women's jewelry.
What?
None of it belonged to anyone in the family, and the sheer amount of it immediately raised red flags.
It's like something straight out of a true crime novel, this seemingly innocent box of jewelry hinting at something much darker.
Exactly. It just goes to show that sometimes the most unexpected clues can lead to the biggest breakthroughs.
Wow, so this box of jewelry could potentially unlock this decades-old mystery. It's incredible. But I guess we'll have to wait and see if there's enough evidence to actually link Mordecai to the crimes.
Right, and that's what keeps us coming back to these cases. The lack of definitive answers, the lingering mysteries, the hope that someday justice will be served. We're left with this unsettling feeling that the truth is still out there, waiting to be discovered.
It's a lot to take in, and I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. What else can you tell us about these murders and the investigation?
Well, there are a few more victims mentioned in the article, each one with their own tragic story. For example, in 1975, the FBI suggested that as many as 14 unsolved homicides between 1972 and 1974 could be the work of the same person.
We've been talking about the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, looking at the victims, the suspects, and all those unanswered questions swirling around this case. But there's another layer to this whole thing as we go deeper into the Wikipedia article that really broadens the scope of the crimes in a pretty scary way.
It does take a dark turn. In 1975, the FBI put out this report suggesting that there could be as many as 14 unsolved homicides between 1972 and 1974, all committed by the same person.
Wow, 14 potential victims. That's terrifying. Who are these other women and what happened to them?
Well, some of their names have become synonymous with this dark period in California history. Rosa Vasquez, Yvonne Kilantang, Angela Thomas, and Nancy Patricia Gidley. They were all young women found strangled, their bodies left in different spots around California. And what's really chilling is that the details of their cases, like their ages, the cause of death, even where their bodies were found, they all have these eerie similarities to the confirmed Santa Rosa victims. It's like you have these puzzle pieces scattered across a huge area. Each one hints at this much larger and more disturbing picture.
It's a disturbing thought for sure. A possible web of murders spanning years and multiple locations. Did the FBI report give any insights into the killer's profile or anything that could help narrow down the search?
Not really.
Yeah.
The report mainly focused on the similarities between the cases, highlighting the patterns that pointed to a single perpetrator. But it didn't give a specific psychological profile or any concrete clues about who the killer might be. It's like having a map with a destination but no clear route to get there.
So more questions than answers and more victims added to this awful tragedy. The article also mentions a woman named Nancy Fusey who disappeared after a night out dancing. Her remains were later found in Reading, which adds yet another location to this growing map of sorrow.
And Nancy's story gets even more tragic. One of her children was later convicted of torturing and killing her own daughter. It really makes you think about the devastating ripple effects of these crimes, how they reach far beyond the immediate victims and their families. A whole cycle of violence and trauma.
It's heartbreaking. We also learn about Laura Albright Odell, who went missing and was found dead in Golden Gate Park with her hands tied.
Yeah.
That detail about how she was bound seems to connect her case back to Teresa Wash's suggesting a possible pattern in the killer's behavior.
Right. You're noticing those important connections, and that's what investigators focus on. Those patterns, those links, anything that could shed light on the killer's mindset, their motives, their methods. The fact that both Teresa and Laura were found with their hands tied points to a need for control, a desire to overpower and dominate their victims.
It's a truly chilling thought, and it seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of these cases. And the article lists even more victims. Brenda K. Merchant found stabbed to death in Marysville, and Donna Maria Braun, a 14-year-old girl whose body was discovered in the Salinas River. Each name, each story adds to the overwhelming sadness and loss.
It's crucial to remember that these aren't just names on a list. They were real people with lives and dreams, people who were loved and are deeply missed by those they left behind. And the fact that their murders are still unsolved just intensifies the pain and frustration.
So where do we go from here? What can we take away from this deep dive into the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders? What does it all mean?
That's the question, isn't it? We've looked at the evidence, considered the suspects, explored the theories, and still the mystery remains. But the search for answers goes on. Even after all this time, cold cases can be solved. Advancements in DNA technology, new investigative techniques, and the tireless dedication of those seeking justice keep that hope alive.
You're saying there's still a chance even now that the families of these victims might finally get some closure?
Absolutely. We've seen it happen. Cases that seemed hopeless, lost to time, suddenly cracked wide open thanks to a new clue, a fresh perspective, or sometimes just pure luck. The truth is out there somewhere, just waiting to be found.
That's a hopeful thought, a reminder that even in the face of such darkness, the pursuit of justice never really ends. This has been a tough journey, a deep dive into a truly dark chapter of California's past. But it's important to remember that even in the face of such tragedy, there's still hope. There's still the possibility of answers, of holding someone accountable, and maybe someday bringing a sense of peace to the families who have suffered so much.
You said it perfectly. And for anyone listening who's interested in exploring this case further, there are tons of resources, online websites dedicated to the victims' maps, of the crime scenes forums where people are sharing theories and discussing new developments. It's a case that continues to fascinate and haunt people, and maybe someday we'll finally have all the answers.
Until then, the memory of these women lives on, a stark reminder of how precious life is and the enduring strength of hope in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the unknown, the unsolved, and the truly unforgettable.